Hi everyone, Callum Watt here. Today I'm going to go through a few pieces in Sketchbook Pro. I've been using it for a few years now and I find it an essential part of my creative process, from sketching to doing digital inking, as well as my painting work and general design creating. All the way through to doing fully rendered painted artwork. Take a look at a couple of my brushes. This one I use for sketching and digital inking, so for storyboarding I will use this predominantly. The nice thing about this is I can get a really fine to really heavy stroke. I've got a couple of sizes of it. That's the fine one, and obviously a heavier one which I can really fill in the areas as well as have a nice fine touch to it. Get up the settings here. The important thing is that it can go right down. That is the smallest it can go, so you get this constant line there. With a little bit of extra pressure we can get that in, so it's really nice for me. I can quickly draw a shape and then start filling in with the same brush without having to swap to other tools. I am also using a Cintiq here, so anything I don't need to access via the keyboard is a benefit. It keeps it all feeling natural, like a piece of paper. Now I do have a keyboard underneath my Cintiq, so I do use a few keyboard shortcuts which really help speed up my process when I'm working as well. I'll just show you one of my other brushes for now. This is what I use for painting with. Let's just get rid of these here. So again, I can have a really fine stroke to really heavy. Again, for me it's just to speed up the process, so I can quickly start working in a shape and then block that in if I need to, but then without having to swap brushes or tools, I'm able to use the same brush. Keeps it all nice, keeps it quite natural. For me that's really important, to keep it a little bit more organic. With these brushes I also have the equivalent of an eraser for them, so same settings as you'll see here as I would have for the brush, the eraser. So we can go back in. Whatever pen I'm using, I tend to favour an eraser that has the same settings. It really means that you're not noticing perhaps where I've erased. It's all part of the original form. But sometimes, particularly perhaps when I'm painting, I will erase as much as I will paint to get that shape and the desired results. Same here for the ink brush I have. So I'm using the larger one here, so let's block that in. I don't know what we've got here, some sort of mechanical piece, but then I've got an eraser where I can go in, fine tune that if I want, or add new form. Now one thing that is really cool as well that I like here is the S key. So the S key will just swap between the last two selected tools. So here I've got my ink brush, S, I'm back to the eraser, S, I'm back to the tool. It just means that it's really quick to swap between them, and I find that when I'm really quickly sketching and wanting to ink something, I just have to worry about one key basically, and I know that I've got the two tools which I'm going to use predominantly for that underneath my finger there. So that really is something that I find super quick, super useful for when I'm quickly getting ideas down. So along with those, there's a couple of actual tools that I use, but again I find really essential for using. First off, the ruler tool. Now, how anyone can do without this, I have no idea. So look, let's get the paintbrush up that I've been using, and I want to put in something nice and angular here. Now, along with the holding shift and drawing straight lines, here we go, there's holding D will draw only in the diagonal. That's really cool, obviously, but we're not always drawing at those angles. So this ruler tool, draw got straight lines, of course, but the important thing is it keeps all your brush settings, it keeps the properties of your brush and the pressure sensitivity that you're putting into it. So you're not going to get just a solid 100% flat line. You're going to be able to recreate your delicate or heavy artwork, whatever you want to do with it. Same for the eraser. So to be able to reproduce that using the ruler is really something else. Same, we've got an ellipse tool. Again, if you do a lot of mechanical shapes, this is great for keeping all those settings that you've spent hours building into your brush. You can keep these. Look at that, you know. And again, it's just great to be able to know you can recreate those shapes perfectly without having to worry about perhaps going in, creating some sort of vector and then stroking it and then making it the way you want it. Here you've got the freedom to push and pull the ellipse any form, you know, for doing if you're doing automotive stuff, if you're doing designs for cars, you're going to need to draw wheels. So this is a great, and at any angle as well, you know, you're not restricted here. So these two tools, along with the brush engine, really for me make it, well, impossible to use anything else. So essentially I've got the freedom to think about what I'm creating as opposed to how I'm going to create it. I don't have to worry about anything else apart from coming up with some cool ideas. And that's really what it's all about, is being allowed to have the freedom to just create. As I mentioned, I'm using a Cintiq, and I've assigned to my pen the space command. And the space command will bring up the puck, and this puck here has a zoom and a pan tool on it, and to have that on one button is so good. What I found when working digitally is I do need to zoom in a lot. If you're doing detail, you're going to want to know where that's going to start and where it's going to end. It's no good being zoomed out for that sort of work. But you're going to have big areas that you're going to fill, and you'll want to see it all large and in the context of the bigger picture. So to have all those on one button press, for me, again, I can't do without it. I don't want to have to be zooming and clicking to get where I want. Here, I've just got freedom to move where I want and where I need to do it. So let's look at a couple of pieces and see how Sketchbook Pro is used in their creation. So here we are. I've got a sketch page open, one that's in progress. We're running at 4x speed here, just in case you're wondering. I'm not that quick. I wish I was that quick. So I've already got an underlying sketch, as you can see, faded down, and I'm using the same pen, my inking pen I did for the sketch work, as I'm going to use now for filling in neat. Now, as you can probably see, a lot of my sketching is pretty neat anyway, but what I do like to do is make sure that my lines are where I want them, and then when I go over in my inking, I'm really looking to see if there's any changes or any improvements I want to make over those sketches. Not necessarily, they're a bit more than guidelines, my sketches. So here you see, sometimes also reproducing lines that you've created in the sketch is difficult, but using, I find, a Cintiq, it's much easier to recreate line work or sketch work and repeat lines. Also things like hatching, and the fine line work that you see, where you've got very close together strokes, as you would do, you know, with a normal pen, is far easier when you've got your hand over the artwork, as opposed to, say, a desktop tablet. And really, the fine line work here you see that I'm using is really so close to feeling like a pen on paper for me, as far as the feedback I'm getting and the accuracy that I can give it. One of the things in Sketchbook Pro 6 is the one-click options on the layers now. It used to be you'd use the radial menu to switch things on and off. Here on the layers, You can now hide layer, lock a layer's transparency, which is for anyone who likes to colour in line work or shade in part of their line work. Locking the transparency of a layer is really, really important. And now that's just one click on off. So you can really quickly edit your layers. There's also the one click for adding a new layer, adding a blend mode to that layer, whether it's multiply or add, and also hiding the layer out. Sometimes if you've got a sketch layer underneath, you'll really want to quickly hide that out. So here I'm using the ellipse tool to help me out. I wanted to get those lines exactly where I wanted them. I didn't want to intersect with those horns that you see protruding from the bottom there, so using the ellipse tool I was able to accurately place both of those lines. I could have sketched them in on another layer perhaps and then erased where they were overlapping. But again, it's all about speed, it's all about it feeling natural. So what I'm going to do now is create a layer where I'm going to add a little bit of colour. It helps just to define some of the artwork for me, helps to pop it out a bit. So we've got a just monochrome, but enough for me to add a little bit of detail, and because these pages get so busy, it's nice to have a little bit of definition here and there. I'm using, similar to my inking brush, just a bit fatter, and then using the bucket tool to fill those areas in. I'm here removing those with an eraser, which has got the same settings again as my inking tools. But what I'm going to use here is a pretty neat transparent pigment to remove areas, and I'm using the fill all layers tool, which looks at boundaries and only fills within those boundaries. So I could have painted in with white again or erase, but this tool is fantastic really for removing large areas using the bucket tool. Very neat, and it also means you can use any of your brushes to act essentially like erasers. Now the reason for that is, here we go, I'm just showing as an example, I can now fill in that colour. If I'd obviously filled in with white, it would have been completely, completely filled in there. So that's a really neat tool for to bucket fill transparent areas. Is excellent. My inking tool, I really find essential. This is going to be the same brush I'm showing you here, I showed you earlier on. So a nice fine pen, almost giving the results of a marker pen, I'd say, a fibre pen. Single flat width to the line work gives it a nice regular feel to it. But with pressure exerted on that, you can get some really nice effects. So here, same brush, just a little bit extra pressure on it, and we're getting some nice fat fill-in lines. So it gives a nice effect, it gives a kind of ink tool effect, but it also saves time. I can fill in areas with the same tool without having to fill with the bucket, without having to swap to another brush. One pen. I mean, these are all personal settings, they're all personal preferences that I've got here, and you can get similar results elsewhere, but to be able to go from that tiny nib to a really big heavy pen and the same tool, for me is essential for speed, for effect. Here you see the little bits of almost like bleeding ink coming through there, as if you're using like a dip pen, which gives a really nice kind of traditional feel to the inking. I think it doesn't feel overly digital, it doesn't feel too like it's a vector pen. So for me, yeah, I've tried to recreate this pen elsewhere, and you just can't, to get that size change in pressure. It's pretty unique, but also there's the overall results, the smoothness of stroke, and the natural feel to when you're drawing. So one of the other tools that I use quite a lot is the Symmetry tool. Here's an old picture and I'm going to update the background. It's a really cool way of blocking in really quick, as you see here, really quickly getting some form down, and seeing how all the shapes work together straight away, left and right. It's a real excellent way of quickly establishing form and shape. You can kind of concentrate on one area, knowing that it's going to be mirrored. Obviously you could flip an image, but to have it drawing live you can really see how that's going to look, how it balances, how the form will work, left and right. And obviously for faces it's a really good tool to make sure you can get your balance and no squint faces. So let's look at some painting. I use Sketchbook Pro for all my painting too. Let's bring in a reference file. Basically this is a character I've already created. I want to do a front view. So I've added him in as an image. Flipped on Symmetry. I'm going to block in the front view. Let's do a full turnaround of this guy. So I'm using my paintbrush. It's the same paintbrush I showed you earlier on, so it's got a really big fall off. Very fine with light pressure, really big with heavy pressure. Again, it saves me having to flip between brushes. I can get the detail as well as the fill quality that I need all under one tool. So I'm using the previous image on a hidden layer, and I'm using that to sample the colours from really, and as a bit of a reference for his front view. So at this stage it's all about just blocking in, getting a bit of a feel for the colour, getting proportions right, and just getting the general form and stance of this guy correct. Once that's blocked in a little bit, we can start to refine the details slightly. It's still very much a case of working in a level of detail here where we're working on all aspects of the guy. We're working on the full figure, not really concentrating too much on one area, not blocking the details too tightly. But it's nice to be able to get the colours in, get the lighting beginning to show through there. There's obviously a long way to go at this stage, but I'm looking at how the shading is going to work. The light sources around the shoulder there, we can see we've got some rim light poking through. And that is kind of it for now, and I'll try and get the whole guy at that level of detail, blocking in some of the finer details, which I just want to know where they're going to be, because I want to know how that's going to react with, say, his uniform underneath, the shadow underneath. But the actual details of what these are going to look like, obviously I know from the previous viewer drew, but at this stage, if we imagine this is the first time, she's like, right, what's working, what's balancing, what is going to make this guy feel natural, what details are going to add to his character, what's going to make an interesting profile to this guy. As I paint, I'm constantly sampling the colours with the eyedropper, pressing the Alt key. As soon as I sample, it flips back to the brush. That way I'm getting a nice blend between my colours, foregrounds and dark colours, highlights and lowlights. I tend not to paint in highlights. It's generally I paint dark from a neutral colour, a mid kind of colour. This way I tend, if you paint highlights too much, you can get hot spots. In certain areas it works, of course, like skin, things like that. You want that kind of bright spot, but I think things like clothing, where you want to keep it a fairly matte finish to the actual material quality, starting with a mid tone and then painting down really helps me. Around the edges here, obviously I'm painting in light because of the spilled light coming around the form of the character. This really helps to define the shape and the sides. Obviously the sides of the character, they are pointing out from us, and having this highlight down the sides really helps to inform the eye that there is actually shape to that. It's not just a front and a back, he has got sides. This character has got form around the edges. So by this stage I've really got into the form of the guy, and I'm adding details to the rendering. The lighting here is still fairly flat. I tend to work in quite muted colours in Sketchbook Pro. A lot of the more dynamic lighting will come later on. I'll take it out of here into Photoshop to kind of add the post-processing, if you like, the work that will really pop the highlights and the lowlights and get it all working nicely. I'll add texture as well as the odd logo and extra detail, which I could easily paint in, but it's quite nice to have these as all separate layers as well as editable layers, which particularly for games work, say, these can be transferred to the actual in-game mesh. So again, refining details on his handsome helmet here. I'm using the ellipse tool, as you see, and I'm using it with my paintbrush, and it's getting the same fall off and pressure that you'd expect, and the opacity that you expect from just using it freehand. So that, again, I can't stress how much it's brilliant to have the ellipse and the ruler tool respond properly to your brush's settings. So here I'm going to use a square edge brush. This was sampled from one of my own drawings of a rectangle or a square. This adds a nice bit of mechanical detail to my organic work. Mainly my work is organic feel to it, very rounded, very flowing. But it's really nice as a contrast to that to have these little sharp areas. They add detail and add a bit of realism. There's always going to be, even in the most organic of designed objects, you're going to have some venting or line work there, which is really going to add that man-made detail. So another really kind of cool brush we've got here. So you can sample any kind of drawing that you make and make it a nib for your pen. You can even sample your painted artwork, which is really cool if you need to do some repeated objects. So here we've got like a gun belt. This is one I made for the back view. So obviously it's coming round to his front here. And that uses the same principle as making all the other brushes in Sketchbook Pro. Normally it will look at the alpha of an area and create a brush from that, but you can tell Sketchbook Pro to sample the actual screen, but it won't include the background. So you can have these really cool shapes looking just exactly like the rest of your painting. So here we're going to make some, I don't know, more grenades perhaps for this guy. Just made a quick shape, started painting in. Now I'm painting against the white here. I decided to shift it over onto him because obviously the lighting's very different. So I'm darkening it down. Again, using all the tools that are to hand. So, and I'm painting it just as I would paint it, as if it was part of him already. I want a new layer here, of course. And what we'll do is, once we're happy with the form that this is going to be, the shape it's going to be, I don't know what it could be. Grenade, do you think? Looks like a grenade. Well, with lipstick on. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to copy the old brush, make a duplicate of that. So it's got the same settings as the one you just saw with the bullets on it. And we're going to sample that, get it the right size. So there we go, it's set to shape and colour, the sample there. So what it's done, we have now recreated that little grenade is now our brush. And like all the other brush settings, for any other kind of brush you can keep it rotated to the stroke, so it's going to flow with your brush stroke. We can randomize that. There are a whole host of settings we can play with in there, what's going to look best. So I think we're just about there with this guy. I'm happy with this form. I've added quite a good bit of detail. Here we are in Photoshop. And as you can see, there's quite a difference there. So I've added quite a few layers of lighting, as well as texture. And I'm kind of in the process of adding detail here. So we're looking at his tattoos. These really could have been done. I could have painted these in Sketchbook. But as I said, sometimes you want these to be edited elsewhere. Perhaps you want to give this to someone else to play with, say the tattoos, because maybe that's going to go on a mesh. So those I created in Sketchbook Pro, which I'll have a look at it in a minute. Here I'm just masking off this big eagle one here, so it feels like it's dropped behind his t-shirt. When I bring it into Photoshop, this is all one layer. The character is all one layer. I could spit it out from Sketchbook Pro as separate layers, so I could slip things in and slot them in where I need it, but with masking and things like that, I don't tend to bother. It makes it simpler for me to just have my artwork in one layer and all the effects and lighting in separate groups above that. So here I'm just fine-tuning the mask that I've used over the top of the eagle there. And the same elsewhere, we've got on his arms there, they're all masked off. I've also used a channel mixer to kind of knock out some colour, which we'll see in a minute. We're just warping that to help it fit to his body, give it that form as well. So the tattoos I could have done maybe in Illustrator, I could have done them in Photoshop, but of course I did them in Sketchbook Pro. The line work is such high quality in Sketchbook Pro, and the effects you get, I find that I used to use Illustrator a lot. I tend to use Sketchbook Pro now. So here's some of the ones that I did for the back view. Obviously I can use a couple of those on this front view, but I'd like to make a couple more. So here I've got a different brush from me. It has very little fall off, it's very flat. Essentially I'm emulating the tattoos of Sailor Jerry. If you haven't heard of him, check him out. He basically defined your standard kind of sailor military style tattoo. He did a lot of work, I guess, in the war period. So your kind of simple pin-up girl tattoos were his style, really. So here I wanted to kind of recreate that look, basically because it fits with the character that I'm doing. Yeah, they're mainly kind of military based. Skulls are always quite fun. Maps, flags, things like that. They're all really good for tattoos and add a little bit of fun, a little bit of detail that reinforces the character. It's not just about let's create a cool uniform, let's create a nice helmet, let's create a wicked gun. Think about who is wearing this, who's holding this stuff. They've got to have character. That's what makes them appealing. It's not necessarily how cool someone looks, but it's also the person behind all that stuff. You've got to bear that in mind. I think it's really important to give that dimension. And when you've only got a 2D image to do it with, sometimes all you've got is to add those little details, those extra nuances that people go, I get that, I see that reference, I know where he's from. Tattoos is one thing, and I could have gone with any kind of tattoos. I could have gone with your tribal style tattoo, but it didn't really fit. I wanted this guy to feel of a certain era and of a certain dedication. So back into Photoshop, finish the tattoo. I'm going to basically just remove the background. I don't need to. It's going to go in as a multiply layer on top, which would knock out the white, but it will make it easier for transforming it and forming it to his body. Just altering the colours here. Tattoos for me tend to look better when they've got a slight purplish blue tinge to them. I guess it's that ink coming through. It suggests a bit of age to them as well, a bit of fading to them. So I'm going to take some of the layer properties that I've already applied to some of the previous tattoos and apply it to this. So you just copy the layer style, and that will take everything over the opacity, any blend modes, as well as how the channels have been mixed. I use that quite a lot when I'm overlaying like logos. It helps to drop back certain things and show the original image right through. You can fine tweak these, you can split the arrows with the Alt key, and that means you can get really into getting some nice effects. So it's almost like the sheen of his skin is still shining through that tattoo as it would. So I wasn't particularly happy with his face. As I said, it's all about adding character. If you've got his uniform done, you've got his equipment done. For me, it's always really important to add in the character, the personality. It wasn't necessary for this piece because, let's say it was just to explore clothing and equipment. But there's no harm in looking at this now. So to reflect that kind of grisly character that I wanted for him, the tattoos suggest it, the weaponry suggests it, the way he's dressed suggests it. He's just wearing his t-shirt. So the face wasn't really doing it for me. He looked a bit dumb, to be honest. So not that this guy's any more intelligent looking, but he looks a bit more mean, and that's kind of what we wanted. So I've gone back in, I've looked at his expression a bit more. I think he still shares the same nose, but I wanted to make sure that every aspect of this character was speaking to the viewer and telling the viewer who he was. Now, the little things like the tattoos and the little bandages, they add a bit of background to him, but obviously to tell us who he is and how he's going to be, his face is really going to be a really good way of doing that. So the face, even if we're, like I said, suggesting we're looking at the uniform here, people are automatically going to be flicking their eyes up to the face. It's just the way we work. So it's nice to have that detail there, that finish, that people will be able to appreciate the entire piece. And of course, a cigar is essential for that kind of character. So, more detail. I decided to add an alien blade to this guy. I did a freehand stroke for the blade. and using the Symmetry tool to create the handle and the hilt here. I'm going to go for some sort of alien squiddy look to it. Again, this is just reinforcing detail, reinforcing character, adding points of interest. I want to make sure that there's no kind of dull areas on him. As an illustration, it's always good to have details for the eyes to follow. So there we go, all the pieces working nicely together now. We've got the lighting and the textures and the details, as well as the underlying painting there. I'd like to thank Chris at Autodesk, and I'd like to thank you guys for listening. Hopefully some of that information is going to be useful and you can use it in your own work. And please drop by my website, callumαλexanderwatt.com, to check out more of my work.